just welcome everyone to tonight's the first training class of the 2022 Rio Grande Valley chapter class training. And there are 25 members in this class, and this gives you just a rundown of where everybody's from. You can tell we've got members from all the way from Edinburgh to South Padre Island. So we have a good mix, and we're going to be sending out a roster so that you know who's in your class might be close to you, so that you might be interested in carpooling to the field trips. I believe everyone has filled out the questionnaire about when they're available for field trips. So we're going to put that schedule together ASAP. And so that's you guys. And we do have a position that is the new class representative to the board. And you would represent your class at our leadership meetings. We have our leadership meeting the first Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock. And think about it, if someone is willing to volunteer to be the class rep, basically what you do is you come to the board meetings, listen to what we're doing, take that information back. You would have a spot during class to make announcements and things like that. And as well, you speak to your classmates and bring any issues they might have to the board. So it's an important position, and just think about it. And if you have any more questions about what it means to volunteer for this, let me know. So far, this is who's sent their pictures into us.
Oh, that's what it is.
And we're going to be putting together the roster. We'll have pictures for you guys so that when you go to your field trips, that's how I got to know everybody. Was I looked at my roster, and then I was like, oh, that must be so-and-so. And so, of course, when you get to a field trip and it's 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and you're out on this birding trip, you may not look quite the same as the photo you sent in, but most of the time you can guess. So thanks for you guys sending those pictures, and everybody else send us a picture. And just a couple of things, housekeeping. We do have a Facebook group, and just request to join it. We post things about training opportunities, volunteer opportunities, and then of course, take pictures when you're out volunteering, and those people post those on there too, and it sort of keeps you up to speed with what our chapter is doing. We also have an email distribution list, and if you want to join that, and it's also very, very helpful, because that's where we send out things that are timely, because not everyone wants to be on Facebook. So join the listserv, and if you want to be on, join that, just put a message in the chat. So our first class tonight is, we're going to begin with Javier de Leon, the superintendent at Estero, Llano, Grande State Park. And immediately to the right of the green box, you can see what Javier looks like when he gets home from a hard day's work. And then some of his employees. And then this picture at the bottom is not Cody Levy, the Texas game warden, that's speaking the second half, but Robert found that picture somewhere. So when you meet Cody, you'll know he doesn't look like this. And I'm going to give a brief introduction of Javier, and then he'll be on. So since 2005, Javier's worked at nature centers all over the Rio Grande Valley, including the National Butterfly Center, Edinburgh Scenic Wetlands, and Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park. He's currently the park superintendent at Estero, Llano, Grande, and serves as an advisor for the local chapter of the Association of Nature Center Administrators, and is active in Texas Children in Texas Children in Nature and the Rio Grande Valley Nature Coalition. So, Javier, I believe Robert's making you the presenter.
Yep. Hi everybody. Before I share my screen, I'm going to give you a little bit of additional background. So I started working in nature centers in late 2005, but when I was still in college, I took, I knew that I wanted to volunteer somewhere in nature doing something so I can eventually become a biologist, which is what I wanted to do. And during my volunteering in 2004, somebody told me about the Master Naturalist program, and they said I should look into it. So I looked into it, and I joined the class in 2005. This RGV chapter has been doing this for 20 years now, and I took the class. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed meeting other folks from around the valley with a lot of the same interests. Everybody, I'm sure you all are interested in nature. I'm sure you all are interested in helping nature and, encouraging native plants and basically taking care of wild animals that need our help sometimes, because people are pretty cruel to nature in general in most times. But what I wanted to say, the class in 2005 myself, I got really busy with school and eventually work, but I never forgot about the chapter. I put in, I'm afraid to say it because I know some people have lots more hours logged in, but I think I have 125 volunteer hours logged in back from between 2005 and 2007. But the nice thing about the Master Naturalist is once you become certified, you always have it. So I of course, volunteer so you can become certified, volunteer as much as you can, but the chapter will be here. And I should say, the chapter is celebrating 20 years this year, and none of the chapter is paid. I'm paid as an advisor. Tony's paid as an advisor, but everything else is completely done by volunteers. So it is a special organization. You get to meet people. I met folks back in 2005 that I still talk to this day, and it is really neat. And as an advisor, we get to see, folks kind of working up the ranks, like from student to president sometimes, or vice president or class director. So it is really neat. And like I said, sometimes, it's the time isn't right. You got to take a little break, but the chapter is always here, and the birds, butterflies, and plants will always need your help in some way or another. Before I start talking, since I'm going to take advantage that Tony's here, so if he wants to chime in and maybe give us some thoughts, this is a lot of pressure because it's y'all's first class. I've never had that honor of speaking to the first class. So, Tony, would you like to say any words as an advisor while everybody starts their classes?
Sure. Thank you, Javier. Excuse me. It's a pleasure to see another class. I've seen 20 classes, I guess, over my tenure here. I helped found this chapter and the other chapter, the South Texas Border chapter. And it's amazing the amount of volunteer work that they do, that you do, and you will do. It overwhelms me. It's the value of volunteer time now, I think for last year was $28.54 an hour. And both chapters last year put in almost $500,000 worth of volunteer time. I think it was like $496,000 or more than that, really, because I think the other chapter just updated their figures. So it probably hit $500,000, I hope. So It's a pleasure to be here. If you have any questions, feel free. My number is posted in many places online, 956-493-8129. And I've seen a lot happening in the Master Naturalist, and it's been all good. And it's been a real pleasure to work with Javier. I depend on him. When we face some challenges, I'll give him a call, and vice versa. And I want you all to think that way too about us. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Tony. Okay. So let me share my screen and we're going to start here. Let's see here. And it has a true professional still tweaking this like between 6 and 6:05. So let's see, share. Work is never done here. Okay. Let me go to the same. There you go. Can everybody see a Texas tortoise?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about basically, I'm going to define that word naturalist a little bit more, because I know when I first started, people thought I was not going to be wearing a lot of clothes while I took the class or something. Anyway, you got to understand, I make bad jokes and really bad puns. I should have a groan button. And then I'm going to talk about some of the frontier naturalists of South Texas and Northeast Mexico, and it's basically it's mostly about one person, but it's kind of a story. Real quick, Barbara, I have till 7:15 or 7:20 or 7:10.
7:20.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what is a naturalist? So, if you Google what is a naturalist, according to Google, it says an expert in or a student of nature. And that's a really very interesting definition, because once you get to a certain point, you know that you can be a student of nature your entire life and you won't know everything. You can devote your life to jumping spiders and you won't know everything. You can devote your life to, native plants, and there's always going to be a lot to learn. So it's a really interesting definition because it's an expert in or student of. But if you're a student of nature long enough, you'll realize you'll never be an expert in nature because there's so much to learn. Anyway, that's what Google says. So I thought that was interesting. But according to our book, a naturalist is anyone who studies and appreciates an object or an organism in nature. If you really like birds, if you really like snakes, if you like everything, you can consider yourself a naturalist. Naturalists are usually generalists and not specialized in one particular kind of organism. If you like everything, if you're, you can be considered a naturalist. It's good to learn about historical naturalists, as they were sometimes the first to describe a species, and I'll talk about that a little bit. How species are described. I might touch on that in a bit. And naturalists have very interesting stories because many species were described to science, hundreds of years ago when the world looked very different than it does today. I will say that, now we have professional biologists that, go to school to study a specific type of organism or a specific type of virus. But, a long time ago, yes, there was scientists that worked for universities and all that stuff, but a lot of important discoveries for science and nature, especially nature, have been made by people that don't have, that don't devote their lives to this. A long time ago, the people that had the ability to study nature in their off time, maybe like doctors or people that were a little well off, like they would take their spare time to study butterflies or study plants. So being a plant taxonomist was not their day job, it was just their interest. And these were people that had to be well off because they had the spare time. Now, a lot of us, just because the world is so modern, we have the time to devote to looking at the natural world and maybe even helping scientists discover new things. So there's apps like iNaturalist, and if you really get into it, I know that Joseph Connors. He's in the South Texas Border Chapter. He took pictures of spiders in his backyard, and it ended up that he put him on an app called iNaturalist, and a scientist that studied that particular kind of spider talked to him, and the first specimen that would be used to describe the species was caught in his backyard in, I think, Farr or McAllen, wherever Joseph lives. So we can still contribute. And even as a hobbyist or as a student, we can still contribute and make valuable contributions. So my whole point is a naturalist can be anybody as long as you're interested in nature, and don't think that you have to know everything. We're all students. And if what I've learned, I've been bird watching since about 2003. I started when I was like 21. What I've learned is the people that tell you they know everything don't know anything. Anyway, so let's keep on going. If they seem like an expert, they really don't know what they're talking about. Okay, let's talk about history. I'm not a historian. I'm a hobbyist in this, but I thought it's a really interesting topic, especially the stuff the first time species were described in our area in South Texas and Northeast Mexico. So I'm going to start with early Texas.
The Indians.
When I was in school, whenever they talked about people discovering Texas or discovering the U.S., I guess when we were taught in school, they kind of left out a lot of Native American information. So before Europeans were here, Native Americans were in Texas, in the Americas, between 13,000 and 10,000 years ago. There's many tribes developed over thousands of years all over Texas. And it's believed that if you were to walk around Texas, in the year 1200, if you just walked around Texas, you probably see a lot of campfires wherever you go, because people lived in Texas all over the place. Most tribes are well known, there's some very well known larger tribes, but there's a lot of lesser known tribes all over Texas. So I got to acknowledge that the Texas population before European contact was believed to be 150,000 to 200,000 people spread all over Texas. And these two pieces of art at the bottom of the screen, those are from Waco Tanks State Park, from the tribes that were in that area. The one on the bottom left is Starman, and the one on the bottom right, I don't remember if there's a name for this one, but he looks like my best friend from high school. Just, big beard and glasses. So, and unfortunately, not a lot is known about some of these petroglyphs. Yeah, nice, ZZ Top. Frank mentioned that, yes. Eventually, though, Europeans did arrive in the Americas, and where we are in Texas, the first map of the Gulf Coast, or one of the first maps, was made by the Spanish explorer, the Pineda. This map shows his kind of crude drawing of the Gulf of Mexico. The big island on the right is Cuba. Then above that is Florida Peninsula, and it kind of loops around the Gulf Coast. And you can see the Yucatan Peninsula, and I think that's the Bay of Campeche somewhere at the bottom of that circle. We were kind of in the middle of the Gulf somewhere. During this time, in the early 1500s, there was a lot of expeditions called entradas, which are entries. So ships would land, the explorers or the conquistadors, whatever, they would go in as far as they could, as far as they had provisions for, or until they got ran out by Native Americans. And this helps map a lot of the Gulf Coast. One of the first extensive explorations was by Cabeza De Vaca. His expedition was he was on one of those expeditions that was exploring the coast. Cabeza De Vaca, I think there was 2 ships and 200 people. There was a shipwreck, some bad luck, and only him and I think 3 other people survived. So Cabeza de Vaca was trying to find the other Europeans in Mexico, and he did a long journey from the Galveston area down the Gulf Coast, supposedly passing between Laredo and where we are. And you can tell on this map where he reached Europeans because that told him where to go, because then he just made a straight line down to the city of Mexico. During these travels, you know, he survived. He had a little bit of knowledge of medicine, and he was able to learn a lot from the Native Americans, and they taught him a lot too. He taught them some stuff, and they taught him. And you know, we always hear about the combative attitude from Native Americans, or how they didn't get along. But there's a lot of stories that people did get along pretty well with Native Americans up until the 18th century, when a lot of trouble started between natives and governments. Okay, keeping on going here. So since the 1500s, the Spanish were exploring a lot in the Americas. They knew that Texas was here. They were based in Mexico. They knew that Texas was here. But between 1535 and the 1600s, there was little further exploration. They just knew that there was a bunch of land there. But when the French started expanding west from Louisiana, the Spanish said, oh, we got to put a stop to that. We can't lose all this territory. So that's when they started establishing a lot of missions in the late 1600s to the late 1700s. So all these dots are different missions that were established in that time period. Of note is this is when El Paso was created. You know, the mission that would eventually become the city of El Paso, Presidio, several in San Antonio, including the Alamo in 1744. And this was the typical mission. If you've been to the San Antonio missions, you kind of see this repeated a lot. We have the big church up in the top right, kind of big buildings for the important people, the Spanish people. Well, importance relative. And then the Native Americans that were allowed to stay in there would stay in these periphery areas. So that kind of started around that time. And around that time is when North Mexico and South Texas was colonized officially by the Spanish. So in 1746, the Spanish province of Nuevo Santander was founded with José Escandón as a leader. And between the 1740s and 1750s, that's when Camargo, Laredo, Mier, Reynosa, a lot of those towns were founded. So here's a map drawn by this gentleman in the top right. This is, see, everybody thinks profile pictures is a new thing for Facebook, but no, it existed way back in the day. Okay, so if you look at this map, the big blue line in the middle, that's pretty obvious what that is. That's the Rio Grande River. And, you know, we say the Rio Grande Valley, but we're actually a Rio Grande Delta, because you can see all those resacas along the coast. Does anybody want to guess, without squinting, anybody want to guess what this body of water is that's north of the Rio Grande River? I'll give you guys a couple seconds.
Flat.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
Jack's Flat.
No. So somebody guessed correctly. It's the Sal del Rey. Those are the Salt Lakes.
Oh,
north of
Raymondville.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Salt Lakes. Well, yeah, they're on 186. Yeah, north of Edinburgh on the road to Raymondville. And if you really squint in there, above the Salt Lake picture, there's the word Salinas. So Salinas was what they called Salt Lakes, because they were salty, Salinas. There's a bigger one and a smaller one to the right. So if you look at a map today, that's La Sal del Rey is a big one, and La Sal Vieja is the one on the right. What do y'all think, without squinting? Oh, what do y'all think that other line, the line above the Rio Grande River? Anybody want to guess what that is?
Arroyo.
That's what I thought, but let me see if anybody else wants to guess without peeking at the map and actually reading it. Yep, yeah, Frank got it. That's the Nueces River. At this time, the area between the Rio Grande River and the Nueces River in Corpus, that whole area was kind of thought as a wasteland because there was no real bodies of water, no rivers or big creeks between them that would sustain settlement. So in this map, they just kind of squished it. Doesn't matter. There's nothing there. So we're not even going to map it. So most of the establishments or most of the settlements were made south of the river. So if you go to the UTRGV campus in Edinburgh, on the southwest corner there's a statue, and I wish the Valley had more statues here, but there's a statue of José de Escandón, and at his feet lays a map of Nuevo Santander. And you can see the map actually talks about each town, you know, the first church there, and then how many families settled there and who was in charge of it. So here, there's La Purísima Concepción de Mier, which is the town of Mier, established in 1753, 19 families led by Captain Florencio Chapa. This is in the southwest corner of the UTRGV campus in Edinburgh, near the Student Services Center, I think, is behind here. Then it's kind of out, but this one is Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe in Reynosa. March 14th, 1749, 40 families. Captain Carlos Cantu was the founder of that area. So it's really interesting, you know, Reynosa, which, you know, we think is just, you know, plain old Reynosa, dusty Reynosa, actually was established before Texas existed, before the United States existed, and before the country of Mexico existed. So there's a lot of history there. And yeah, it's an old town. Speaking of Mexico, so all this was done under the Spanish, you know, while they're setting up colonies all over their territory. Eventually, in 1810, Miguel Hidalgo began uprisings against the Spanish and their way of life and their way of kind of disenfranchising native Mexicans. So that started a long series of uprisings and a revolution to gain freedom from Spain. In 1821, an independent constitutional monarchy was established that created the country of Mexico. Then in 1822, an emperor was named, and then in 1823, a president was named. And if y'all remember Carlos Santana, or not Carlos Santana, that's a guitar player. It's been a long day. Santana, yeah, Santana, the guy from the Alamo. He was actually president, dictator, ruler of Mexico 6 or 7 times, because he would become ruler, then they would oust him, and then he'd become ruler again. So Mexico has always had a very tumultuous history. So it's you know, Mexico's a special place, but since their beginning, it's always been pretty hectic as far as their government goes. But during all this tumult, in 1821, before Mexico was Mexico, the Spanish granted Moses Austin permission to establish a colony in what's now Texas. Moses dies, and then the government gives his son, Stephen F. Austin, authority to continue his colony in Texas. And then there's a confusion because there was 3 different governments in 3 different years. The Mexican emperor grants permission to Stephen F. Austin to bring 300 families into Texas. So that's how that started. During this time, you know, Mexico is a brand new country, and they wanted a big expedition to explore the limits of the country on the eastern side. So it's called a boundary commission, Comisión de Límites. It was led by Mier y Terán, who was a leader, but he was a general by day and a botanist in his off time. So he was a naturalist in his own way. Jean-Louis Berlandir, who was a university taught botanist and scientist, and Jose Maria Sanchez y Tapia, which is an artist. So these folks, so a little bit more about Terán. Mier y Terán, born in 1789, He helped liberate Mexico from the Spanish as a military officer, became a congressman, and he was one of the Stephen F. Austin's biggest supporters. And they said he was too gifted a congressman, so they sent him away because he was causing a lot of trouble in Mexico City, such as looking for indigenous people's rights and other stuff that the government didn't like. This was in the 1820s. So it was thought that he went on the commission to keep his influence away from Congress in Mexico City. Like I said, he eventually befriended Stephen F. Austin. And this gentleman, although he's very interesting, he was one of the people that Mexico, history is really interesting. Mexico did not want to allow slavery, but this gentleman helped Stephen F. Austin continue to have slaves in his colony. Such interesting. So anyway, after the Boundary Commission, he died in 1832 by suicide. He was buried next to the recently executed Emperor Iturbide. Interesting guy. What I'm going to talk about most tonight is Berlandir. Berlandir was born in 1805 in France. He studied under this gentleman, Auguste Ferrami de Candolle, in Geneva. And de Candolle was thought of as, Europe's best botanist taxonomist at the time. And Berlandir was a gifted student, so he assigned Berlandir to join this expedition in Mexico and the Americas. So he joined the expedition as a botanist, zoologist, and artist. There are no pictures of Berlandir, so only his artwork survives. So these kinds of paintings on the right, those are Berlandir paintings. So this is two members of the Cocos Indian tribe, or Native American tribe, from northern Mexico, or somewhere in South Texas. I will say Berlandir was born in 1805. He got sent to Mexico when he was a young 21-year-old. So if you can imagine, not very mature and typical 21-year-old. He was gifted a lot of scientific instruments, like a brand new telescope, gifted to him by his mentor, and he lost it in Paris. He forgot it at the hotel before coming to Mexico. So funny. Typical 21-year-old. If you're interested, the diaries are kind of not transcribed directly, but they're summarized, and you can find this on Google Scholar online for free. It's written in Spanish, and you can kind of see kind of what they are looking at. Some people say that Berlandir was mostly looking at how to support colonies, but those were other folks in his group. Mostly it was scientific based. So the next couple of slides, since sometimes I run long, the next couple of slides are going to kind of show the routes that the expedition took. So this is Mexico back in that time period, 1820s. So they left Mexico City. They took the road from Saltillo to Mier, went up to Victoria, and eventually met up with Austin's colony up in central Texas. Between Saltillo and the Rio Grande River, they made several observations of plants, including Malvaloca grama opuntia, which are different kinds of cactus. And they collected several specimens, several botanical specimens, including Texas ebony. And this is where, so Texas ebony was revered by a lot of the locals that already knew this plant. So the Native Americans that they talked to told them that you can make a coffee out of this bean. You can eat the mahuacatas, the grains, you can roast them and eat them. The wood is a very hard wood. So the flowers are aromatic. All that kind of stuff was told to Berlandir, to the expedition. What Berlandir did is he had a connection to the scientists back in Europe. And the scientists in Europe, they were the leading scientific community in the world at the time. And when people name a species or describe a species to the rest of the scientific community. Basically, whoever does it first gets to quote unquote discover that species. So this collection of Texas ebony in the outskirts of Monterrey was basically what the entire species was based on for the scientific community. You can see up at the top, there's BERL in parentheses. Sometimes in botany, the person who described the species, it's kind of an honorarium where they place his name or his initials there to describe who described it, to describe who described it. Another plant that was described around between Monterrey, Saltillo, and here was anaqua. Interesting here is anaqua was first described by Turan and Berlandir. And at the time, Berlandir would collect plants. He would prepare the specimens in plant presses, which is he'd get the plant, lay it flat on maybe like a hard paper or the equivalent of cardboard back then. And then he'd stack plants on top of each other in a big plant press, and then he would ship that to Geneva in Europe. And that would get reviewed by the scientists over there, and that's how basically the scientific community kept track of new species around the world. During their travels, the general's coach was very heavy, had silver inlays all over it. It would always break down, and they couldn't go to Discount Tire to repair a wagon wheel. So they went and they had to fabricate their own replacement parts. So that took some time, and that allowed Berlandir to explore and collect other plants and talk to Native Americans in that area to talk about medicinal uses of the plants. So he collected around the Frio River, which is up near Gardner State Park area, Uvalde. Collected several plants, black brush, known as ubiquitous. This has benth next to it, so somebody else might have described it around that time, but he collected it around there. Texas persimmon, another scientist, Sheol, but this was also collected around that time. Referred to as chapote. You know, many of the common names from 200 years ago are still used today, and chapote, it's not Spanish, and it's not in English, it's not French. So some of the plant names that we use today are Nahuatl or some kind of Native American language from back then. So Texas persimmon, otherwise known as chapote, you know, highly regarded by Native folks back in the day for their food, for their wood, and other stuff. This is a page or 2 pages from Berlandir's diary. Like I said, it's not fun reading. If you squint, it's on the top left, you can see that I guess they went to sleep
My
at
face is not in there.
yeah, oh, you might want to mute yourself there for all you guys. So I guess they went to sleep at 11:36 because at 4:20, I think said something, got up or something. 5:45, he just wrote the time and then went back to sleep or didn't do anything. 6 o'clock, 6:40, 6:32, 7:48, 8:40. So there's just a long, exhaustive list of what they were doing. The other in print journal talks about, you know, they traveled from this villa to this ranch in a day. And interesting, a lot of those places are towns and cities now. So some more traveling in 1828 while they explored South Texas and beyond. They kind of made their way around Texas. They, at some point, this expedition, they had some days of rest in San Antonio, and they went on a buffalo hunt east of San Antonio with a large group that consisted of, you know, folks from Mexico and like European folks. Anyway, half European, half Mexicans at the time, and Native Americans, just a big group together going to hunt buffalo west of San Antonio, not east. So, at the time, there was a lot of communication and cooperation between Native Americans and Europeans or Mexicans, sorry. And a lot of the knowledge that that was being passed around was medicinal uses for plants, how to survive basically in our brush or in the South Texas wilderness. So some of the tribes, the bigger tribes that were encountered were Comanche, Cherokee, Caragua, Huastecos, Kickapoo. This painting right here is a member of the Kickapoo tribe from that expedition. But it's really interesting. A lot of the other tribes were a lot smaller, and those included Garzas, Cocos, the Pajarito tribe, Hanambres, Banis, Panguayas, just a lot of tribes. And, I read somewhere that there's maybe 80 tribes just in deep South Texas that existed before Europeans kind of took over. So Berlandir's drawings and notes of Native people became their own books, basically used by many folks studying the ways of life of Native folks. Here's a painting of Cherokee from the 1820s. And some of the artifacts that Berlandir collected now live in several of our institutions of study in the US. So these were not taken, these were gifts from back then. How they got to the Smithsonian, I'll tell you later. But some really neat things. This is a bone scraper, I guess used to scrape meat or sinew and other stuff from animal skins. This was collected in New Mexico, but still part of the same, maybe originated in New Mexico, but it made its way to Texas somehow. I keep forgetting to block out this little block here that tells you what this is, but if you haven't read the little block, it says dried fungus used for tinder. So Native Americans would carry this stuff around, and tinder is how you start a fire. Once you have that spark, you wanted to put it on something that's highly flammable and holds fire for a long time. So to start a fire, Native Americans would carry dried mushrooms, and that basically started the fire enough so you can add sticks and grass to make the fire bigger, and then eventually you can add logs. So these are some of the things that were collected around that time. Some more travels in 1829. San Antonio to Goliad, San Antonio to New Orleans, through Aransas Bay, and then back to Matamoros by way of Laredo. More specimens collected. Retama, noted as widespread around arroyos and rivers. Giant mimosa, Mimosa pigra, variety Berlandieri. This one, in the diaries, it talks about how the horses and the men were spooked because they came upon a canyon with, who knows how big the canyon was? We're in South Texas, but they came upon a canyon filled with this plant, and all the leaves started closing slowly. So they thought the canyon was haunted because all the plants started moving on their own. Now we know this is sensitive briar or sensitive bush. You touch it and the leaves kind of close by themselves. During this time, it was talked about a lot how the whole expedition had to be very careful with the skins. So like I said, there wasn't, between the Rio Grande River and the Nueces River, there wasn't lots of sources of water in the brush country. So this is a type of tanker truck that existed back then. Here in this postcard, it says andando con pulque. So this person is selling that kind of liquid, pulque, which is like a drink. I don't know if it's alcoholic or not, but as you probably have guessed by now, those on top of the burro are maybe goat or lamb, sheep carcasses, skins, that the insides have been removed. They tie off the legs, they tie off the arms, they fill it with water, and that's just a gigantic canteen that could feed multiple people instead of just one person. So if you can imagine crossing arroyos and rivers with retama and mesquite and huizache and all kinds of thorny plants that we're very familiar with, And you have to be careful because you can lose all your drinking water if they get punctured. So yes, so if you, and if you're super thirsty, it's 100 degrees outside, and this is where you get your water from. Somebody dips a ladle from the neck of this canteen, and that's how you get your water. My birthday is on October 6th. If anybody wants to get me one of these for my birthday, I would totally wear it on my back. That's the modern day, what do they call those backpacks that have water in them? Anyway, October 6th, you guys. Remember me if you ever see one of the camel pack. Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. Yeah, it's the modern day camel pack. Anyway. Eventually, Berlandir parted ways with the Comisión de Límites. I'll tell you why in a little bit later part of the story. But he kind of traveled around northern Mexico, and he just kept on his own, I guess. And eventually he settled in Matamoros. Here is the Matamoros skyline from the 1830s. Like I said, he eventually settled in Matamoros, and he made his living as an apothecary. So he used a lot of the knowledge that was shared from Native Americans. He wrote all of that down, and he used his knowledge to help heal people as an apothecary, kind of like a pharmacist from back in that day. I forgot to say that during all these travels, something of note was, at that time, there's all these settlements. Most of them, pretty much everyone was Catholic at the time. So, there was the church rituals every year, like Christmas and Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday and all that kind of stuff. So whenever there's the big church celebrations, the Native Americans would go from their settlements to the towns to kind of observe and maybe, observe from afar. And then when it was time for the Native Americans to do some of their rituals, the townspeople would go over there and watch from afar as they did their stuff. So for a while, it was kind of a cooperative, you stay over there, I stay over here, and we're all good. Some of the stuff that Native Americans would do, as around springtime, Native Americans would purge themselves of all the old bad juju to purify themselves and get ready for spring and the renewed earth after spring and all the green leaves everywhere. So as a tribe, the Native Americans would prepare purgatives, which is concoctions that make you throw up. And the whole tribe would throw up together and just get rid of all the negative energies and negative toxins in their body to prepare for the earth's bounty. Stuff like that. So it's just really neat. It's a completely different time than what we're used to. Okay, back to nature. While Berlandir lived in Matamoros, he still collected all kinds of data. Astronomy information. He collected temperatures, 15 feet in the air, ground level, and 15 feet below ground. He made studies on sound. He made notes on birds, plants, and animals. He traveled several times to Green Island, which is off the coast from Port Mansfield, and made notes about the birds and other animals there. So these are some of the drawings that existed. Here's a nice map of, I think that's the Arroyo up at the top, not the Nueces, Rio Grande River, and south into Mexico. Again, you see on the top left, Las Salinas, which are the salt lakes. Reynosa is pretty much south of there. Camargo Mier, and a settlement called Refugio, which I think is not there anymore. And you can see there's the Arroyo above the river, and he called it El Rio Grande. Other people call it Rio Bravo, but some of the islands off the river. Another detail map, Reynosa to Matamoros. Again, a lot of the settlements south of the river. If anybody's familiar with downtown Matamoros, this is downtown Matamoros from the 1830s, 1840s. Later life, eventually married, had several children. There's no record of where those children went, but it's believed that most children went into the US and got kind of like lost to history. Lack of travel back to Europe, a mystery, but I think I know why, which I'll reveal about 10 minutes. As usual, I'm running really late. So some involvement in the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. Berlandir was the only person that could speak French and Spanish. So the Mexicans sent him to General Zachary Taylor during that war when the U.S. was saying, well, the border should be on the Rio Grande, and Mexico was saying the border should be at the Westes River. Berlandir presented General Taylor with a warning not to cross the Arroyo Colorado. The next day they crossed it, and they met at the Battle of Palo Alto, where Berlandir was the field surgeon for the Mexican army. Some involvement in politics. He might have been the mayor of Matamoros for a while, continued to collect scientific data, and then he was in prison for something political. And then in 1851, Berlandir went to San Fernando, and he crossed a swollen, flooded San Fernando River and died on horseback. So what's going to happen to the 20 plus years of scientific knowledge? What's going to happen to his collection? Well, during the Mexican-American War, there was a lot of soldiers that they themselves were naturalists. They were students in nature, and several of them were really good at it. So after the Mexican-American War, one person, Darius Couch, he was interested in gathering biological data. So he took many notes of the birds that he encountered while at Fort Brown, which many of y'all, if you've gone birding at UT RGV in Brownsville, you know that it's a nice place to look at birds and stuff. Darius Couch was down here. He got sent back up north, but he asked the Smithsonian to, he asked for a leave of absence from the Army so the Smithsonian could pay him to come down to Brownsville and collect scientific data. Unfortunately, he wasn't really good at it himself, so he had to hire people, and one of his helpers was the assistant for many years of Berlandir. And this assistant put Couch in contact with Berlandir. He wasn't having a lot of luck catching and cataloging stuff for science. So he was surprised to find 24 years of data related to mammals, insects, geology, physics, all kinds of stuff. He just found a treasure trove of real useful scientific data for that area. Berlandir wanted as much of the Couch wanted as much of the collection as possible. He bought a lot of the collection for $500, which is about $14,000 today. A lot of the money, I think Smithsonian put in $12,000, and Couch purchased some of it for himself. Sent it up. The Smithsonian was super excited. They told him exactly how to pack everything in crates very carefully to get sent back to the Smithsonian Institution. Couch remained in the area. He did manage to catch a few things, including Couch's kingbird, which he collected near the mouth of the river, and Couch's spadefoot toad. This one was collected a little bit farther up north than the mouth of the river. Couch's spadefoot toad, one of the most the cutest toad, one of the cutest toads here. And I'll leave this here because some people don't like toads. Okay. Unfortunately, Couch could not get armed escorts that could travel with him past Saltillo to explore the rest of Mexico because of a lot of unrest. So Couch had to return to Massachusetts in 1854, and a few years later, the Civil War broke out. So Couch was involved in the Civil War on the Union side, and he fought in several battles, including Seven Pines, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg. So we have Couch's kingbirds in our backyards and in our parks in the valley, and which is really neat. And here's the picture on the right, picture taken minutes after the Gettysburg Address. So here's Couch, Darius Couch. Here is Abraham Lincoln, who just sat down after giving the Gettysburg Address. And historians believe that Couch is seated at President Lincoln's right when he gave that address. So since we have Couch's kingbirds in our backyards, we're all like super famous because we have a connection to the Gettysburg Address. Anyway, I feel famous. Anyway, so it's very interesting. Because Couch was in the Civil War, there's lots of information about him. So, Couch's biggest contribution was finding Berlandier's collection. So the collection included 2,000 boxes and 150 glass bottles with notes, maps, drawings. Like I said, Couch bought some of the collection for himself, which he sold to Yale and Harvard and Princeton, some of the big institutions of the day. Some of the collection included drawings. So if you've ever been to Goliad, this is a drawing of the Presidio of Goliad from the mission at Goliad. So this is the Goliad skyline from the 1840s. A lot of the data that was collected was again shared with the scientific community. So this was published in 1858. This was the volumes that talked about North American birds for the rest of the world. So in this is available on Google for free since it's so old. There's Berlandier's wren. This is a wren that was specific, discovered and described by Berlandir, and this species description was written by Couch. So there's a lot of species that were studied by other scientists, and in honor of Berlandir, who is like he's already passed away, but he collected these species. A lot of the species were named after him. It's a nice book. Too bad a lot of the information is outdated, but the pictures are nice. So Couch's greatest achievement, he didn't collect very much. He wasn't really good at it, but he got the big collection made by Berlandir of species from our area, South Texas and Northeast Mexico. So some of the species, this isn't all of them, but some of the species that have been attributed to Berlandir, named after him, are Rio Grande leopard frog, Rana berlandieri. I think Rana is an old genus. Anyway, Texas tortoise, Gophers berlandieri, Mexican badger used to have a Berlandir name, but they changed the name for some reason or other. For plants, you have guajillo, mountain laurel at some point was named for Berlandir, but they named it back. Berlandir's fiddlewood, cenizo, Berlandir's wolfberry, lots of different plants. And you can see a lot of his actual specimens collected down here in the valley at different websites like the Harvard Herbarium. So Berlandir sent 25,000 specimens to his mentor across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1800s. His mentor was not very happy and called his collection sloppy. So maybe that's why Berlandir never went back, because maybe he got so dejected he didn't want to go back to Europe because his mentor called him sloppy. So he stayed here and he ended up dying here, basically. So one of the interesting things, if you look through there, this is an interesting plant. It's Gachnadia hypoleuca. Hypo means without, and leuca means color. So this is chomonque, and the bottom of the leaves, the top is a really nice green, the bottom is white. And this plant in our area, in the Rio Grande Valley, it's only in Starr County and in a few places in the wild. So at some point, either here or in North Mexico, Berlandir collected a lot of these plants that now live in Harvard. So, like I said, the only things that survive, no pictures of himself, just a lot of our native animals. soft shell turtle, sorry, long day. A kind of shell here, Unio cognatus. Oh, nice. Barbara just said they have a sample of Chamonque at Ramsey Park. And this is kind of interesting. If you've ever heard of cochineal, which is a scale insect that lives on cactus, before the Europeans came to the Americas, they didn't have a really good red dye. The only red dyes that existed in Europe made things orange. So, so once Europe kind of came to America, they would export this particular dye made by this particular insect back to Europe. So the red coats were red because of this import from the Americas. So this is dried up cochineal bugs that make red dye from 1841. It's a blue catfish. It could be a channel cat. I'm not really good with fish, unfortunately. And recently there was anthropologist from Reynosa had a series of Berlandir in El Mañana, which is a Reynosa newspaper. So it's 7:05. I have a few minutes to talk about our third naturalist. This is more recent. This is Robert Runyan. So Couch took the collection in the 1850s. Between that and the early 1900s, there's really not a lot of data talking about how specimens from the valley contributed to the scientific knowledge of the world. But in 1909, Robert Runyan moved to the valley. I think he was from Kentucky. He was by day, he was a commercial photographer taking pictures of people. Eventually, the Mexican Revolution broke out around, Matamoros, Brownsville. So he took pictures of that. And he took 15,000 photographs that are in a collection online housed by UT Austin. And that's the gentleman right there. He looks like he's holding a man o' war or something with sargassum on it on the beach. So he took pictures of local life. This was somewhere in Brownsville. That looks like one of the university buildings in the back. But, if this was taken in the early 1900s, at least we can identify either bobwhite or snipe on the left. They're all water birds, so I'm thinking it's snipe. A couple of redheads, maybe some geese, the larger birds. But, just pictures of normal life down here. River flooding from Brownsville, 1918. Huge bass. It says deep sea bass. Length 7 feet 6 inches. Weight 460 pounds. This next picture, this is Pancho Villa in the middle, General Pershing on the left, and a Mexican general on the right. This is not an ocelot, it's a bobcat. But this is an American soldier from Fort Brown from that time period. But again, he wasn't a trained biologist. He was a naturalist. He was interested in nature in general. So in his off time, he developed an interest in botany, and he eventually stopped the photography, began a curio shop, and made money that way. But in his spare time, he would publish books and take notes on plants and talk to other folks that were interested in plants around that time. He wrote a couple books, Texas Cacti, and later vernacular names of plants indigenous to the valley. And he began a campaign to save the native sable palm around 1920, because a lot of sable palm trees were being cut down around that time. Here's his book on vernacular names. He thought it was important to save the names of the common names of plants from the valley. I think you can find this online by the Native Plant Project. What's really interesting is here, this was published in 1947. He said, the rapid destruction of the native plants of the area down the valley for agricultural purposes, the building of levees along the river to stop overflow of water from the river, and also the drainage of resacas has caused the loss of many kinds of native plants. Some of them are now extinct in this locality. This new condition will bring about the introduction of a succession of weedy herbs, which will take the place of the beautiful and useful native flora with its many rare and valuable plants. So even in the 40s, he was concerned that we were altering our landscape and introducing non-native plants. And he was completely correct. Cattle ranchers brought in different kinds of grasses from Africa and other parts of the world, and those are some of the native or the invasive exotic grasses that we have all over the place. So he read it right. But while he was studying plants, he actually described a few new species to science. Runyan's onion, the best plant name ever. Oripantha macromeris, a variety Runyonii. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, thank you. Somebody just posted the Robert Runyan book on the chat if you want to see the PDF. Runyan's water willow. You can purchase some of these plants. I just bought a few of these at the Butterfly Center a couple months ago. Or was it from the Native Plant Project? Can't remember. This next one, Runyan's Eisenbeckia or Limoncillo or Chopoi. This plant, Robert Runyan, it's a native citrus plant, and it looks kind of like a citrus, but it looks different than the citrus trees. The leaves are different. Robert Runyan collected this near Resaca in Brownsville, and he planted some of these trees in his yard in Brownsville. He went back a few months later to get some more at the same Resaca, and the whole Resaca had been drained and cleared out for agriculture. So for a while, he had no idea where else this plant is in the valley except for his yard. So eventually he described the species. It's a new species to science, but he couldn't find it until eventually he found others. Thankfully, I know that there is a specimen of this at Ramsey Park, and I think somebody, Mike Heap, might grow them for purchase. Yes, Heap has propagated them, but this is a rare plant that he described. Several others, Manfreda longiflora, which is formerly Polyanthes runyonii. So, I've talked about historical naturalists, but to an extent, we're part of history as time marches on, and there's still a lot of things left to discover. And fortunately, sharing photos and making, finding animals that other people are interested in is a lot easier now. There's a gentleman who studied tarantulas that came. He lived in Cameron County in the 1990s, and while he was here, he knew how to differentiate tarantulas by species. So he described 2 tarantula species new to science from Cameron County in the 1990s. There was a new dragonfly species discovered in 1992. But now, with our cell phones and email, you can send pictures very easily. Communication is a lot quicker. So there was a new butterfly discovered in the valley in 2013, Victoria's mini streak. And this is a little bit older, but a couple of years ago, this caterpillar, which is not a small caterpillar, it's maybe like 2 inches. Sorry, this is usually 1 inch. That's 2 of those. Feeds on Colima, and this was unknown to science. So scientists collected this at the Sable Palm Grove in 2014, and it's a new species of moth described for science at Patelodes audubonii. And it's a really cool caterpillar. So yes, and like I said, Joseph on iNaturalist took pictures of spiders around his house and happened upon a spider that scientists were really interested in, and it became new to science. So lots left to discover. That's why it's so nice that there are avenues for us to share this knowledge. And I hope that you guys get an iNaturalist training at some point. So I think I actually did it. I have 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Let me just check. Yes, that's the last slide. Any questions or comments? This presentation looked very different 3 years ago because comments have helped me improve it. So yes, I'll open it up to you guys.